We're joined tonight by acting Greens leader Scott Ludlam on a day that has been full of news about clean energy finance, wind turbines and coal mines. Senator Ludlam, thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Well, I hope you're celebrating Clean Energy Week. I need to get your views right off the top. We've seen the grabs from the Prime Minister just there, committing to announce the government's emissions target sometime next month, promising that it won't be an airy-fairy target that comes to nothing. Your response?
Having Prime Minister Tony Abbott lecturing other countries on their climate change targets would be funny if the situation wasn't so serious. We're interested not just in what the government's targets are, but how they plan to get there. It's not just going to be a case of throwing a target way over the horizon in 2030, by which time the Abbott government will just be a distant and unpleasant memory. But what do they actually propose to do today to start setting us on that path, when everything that they have done thus far on climate change has been in the wrong direction?
So tell me, what do you think other countries will think when they hear those words from our Prime Minister, and what are they going to think when we rock up in Paris later this year?
Australia, I don't know how far it's percolated into domestic media, and I suspect not very far, but Australia is copping a bucketing at international climate change negotiations. We're being treated like a pariah, and it wasn't always the case. If you go back to the way the Howard government behaved during Kyoto negotiations, we have a very bad reputation at that time. We made pretty significant progress during the Rudd-Gillard era because at least there was some propositions for domestic abatement on the table that were starting to work, and now it's all being sent backwards. So I don't think the international community takes it seriously at all.
Well, we will wait and see what's announced next month. I want to move on to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, because the government did seem to kick off Clean Energy Week by declaring and directing that the Clean Energy Finance Corporation should not be investing in existing wind farms, but rather in new and emerging technologies. Now, I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here. Doesn't the Prime Minister have a point that those things that can operate without a subsidy, indeed if they can, should go ahead and do so?
No, I think it's not devil's advocate. It's a reasonable question. But the fact is the Clean Energy Finance Corporation doesn't hand out subsidies, and the government appears to have completely misunderstood its purpose, or if they do understand it, they're trying to get it out of the market altogether. For research and development, or getting projects up to the point where they can be commercialised, that's what ARENA was for. ARENA is a grants-based organisation that's designed to get you to the point where you're almost commercial. And of course the Abbott government tried to get rid of ARENA. They ended up just gutting the funding and trying to demobilise it as much as they could. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation, though, is about risk. Clean energy, whether it be wind or solar or wave energy plants or energy efficiency, is not well understood by the finance community. And so what the CEFC is there to do is take the risk out of those investment decisions. It's not handing out grants or writing cheques. It's a body that is there to make a profit, a small profit, but an important one for the taxpayer, and get projects over the line that wouldn't be able to otherwise. It's been very successful in doing so.
Well, indeed, one of the directives as well that Finance Minister Matthias Cormann and Treasurer Joe Hockey have given to the CEFC is that they should lower their risk profile but increase their profits. Now, if I said that to my financial advisor, she'd probably have a chuckle and then patiently explain to me the concept of risk and reward. Has the government asked the CFC to do the impossible here?
Yeah, it's deliberate. Like, they're setting them up to fail, and there's no question at all. We shouldn't treat it as any more complex as that. Lower your risk profile, increase your return to the taxpayer, and don't bankroll wind or small-scale solar, i.e. the things that are most able to make a return to the taxpayer. They're getting set up to fail, and presumably when the CEFC struggles to provide some financial statements for the next year and they're not as good as they've been to date, that will be taken by Cormann and Hockey and Abbott, if he's still around, as another reason to bash up the CEFC. It's like student politics on a really bad day. They should simply get out of the way and let the CEFC get on with its job.
Well, Mark Butler said today that what the government was doing was bloodletting the CEFC, as the government wasn't able to kill it off outright in the Senate. Now, as I understand it, this directive does have to come back to the government. The CEFC gets the chance to comment on it, then it comes back to the government, and they need to table it in the Parliament for it to become legally binding. Will the Senate stand by and watch while the government tries to interfere in the decisions of what is a statutory body with an independent board? Are there any avenues open to the Senate here?
Well, maybe. And look, I won't speak for the whole Senate. The Greens, as we've done before, will do everything that we can to protect the independence of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and keep it in business. But there's a step before that that I think is quite important. Section 65 of the CEFC's Act would appear to make it completely unlawful for the government to do what it's doing. A straightforward reading of the Act says you can't direct the board of this independent corporation to not make an investment in something that would otherwise be within its charter. So I understand the CEFC has sought legal advice. I think it'd be very interesting to see how they interpret this highly politicised instruction by the government.
Indeed, that will be worth following. I want to turn now to wind farms. Both Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott have railed against the visual impact of wind farms. As a former planning minister, I used to find it much harder to approve a wind farm than a coal mine, mainly because people object to what they can see. Now, do you think Tony Abbott's ever seen an open-cut coal mine, for example?
Look, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he has. The Abbott government is a wholly owned subsidiary of the coal and oil and gas industries. I'd be really surprised if Prime Minister Abbott has never seen an open-cut coal mine.
Well, they're not a thing of beauty, for goodness sakes.
No, they're not a thing of beauty at all. I mean, you tell that to people in the Hunter Valley who are trying to protect and preserve entire towns from disappearing into coal mines, or the people of Morwell who were poisoned for months after that coal mine burned out of control last year. They are a blight on our landscape. They sterilise areas from other forms of economic activity. They are Australia's most important source of greenhouse gas emissions. They're not good for humanity, Prime Minister. But unfortunately, the debate is not proceeding in terms of a basis in fact. The Abbott government is doing what it is able to do from the point of view of the executive on behalf of coal donors, and the fossil fuel sector, keep in mind, donated to the Liberal National Parties, their state and federal branches, just under $1 million in the 2013-14 financial year. That's what's going on here. It makes me a bit crazy anytime I hear somebody describe this attack on clean energy as ideological. It's not. It's very, very pragmatic and cold-blooded. It's got nothing to do with ideology at all.
Well, speaking of pragmatic, we know that there is one member of the Abbott government who doesn't like open-cut coal mines, or at least doesn't like the Shenhua coal mine, and that's, of course, Barnaby Joyce. That coal mine seems to be very close to approval by the New South Wales Liberal government. Major hurdle overcome by the feds last week. Do you think Barnaby Joyce should resign from cabinet?
What is the point of Barnaby Joyce? What is the point of him?
Is that a rhetorical question?
I guess. I mean, you might do a better job of it than me. He's a minister in the executive. He sits around the cabinet table. He's a deputy leader of the National Party. He's the local member for the area. And if he hasn't been able to talk some sense into Greg Hunt, then you have to wonder what on earth is his purpose. I think what is going to come down to, as has so often been the case, it'll be local communities, particularly farming communities on the Liverpool Plains and the surrounding areas, with the Greens. It sure as hell won't be the National Party stepping up, because if the minister isn't able to do anything about it, then, as usual, it'll probably come down to the local community.
The Greens did quite well in the most recent New South Wales election in that area of the world. Do you think that the Nationals ought to be concerned about the rising community sentiment as expressed in that election?
I wish they were more concerned about coal seam gas and open-cut coal mining. For sure, the politics of it are out there for all to see. We did extremely well in the Northern Rivers region because the Nationals had been completely ineffective in doing anything about coal seam gas. And I would have to say as well, a lot of the leases that we were fighting against up there were a legacy of state Labor in New South Wales. And what they were able to do, I think, was very cleverly turn the extraordinary mobilisation behind the Bentley blockade into a really effective political campaign. And I think it's entirely plausible that we're going to see that happen again on Mr. Joyce's watch.
I want to take you to another topic before we end this interview, and that's exercise talisman Sabra. I don't know who names these things, but last week you expressed concern about this three-way joint training exercise with the US, Australia, and Japan. In fact, you said it should be canned. Why do you take that point of view?
It's highly significant. This is the first time that the Japanese self-defence forces are participating, and so the issue hasn't been very widely reported inside Japan, but it's obviously caused some alarm there because their constitution actually prevents them from engaging in hostilities overseas. But what we see really, I think it's part of President Obama's pivot into the Asia-Pacific, so-called. What we see are exercises based on offensive warfare. They're practicing amphibious landings on beaches, paratroopers, and practicing invasions of foreign countries. I would have thought Australians and Australian foreign policy could do with a dose of independence after the catastrophic errors in recent military history where Australia, under two successive Liberal governments, has blindly followed the United States into invasions of the Middle East. And here we are apparently blindly practicing for further offensive military engagements. We need an independent foreign policy, and that's why there are demonstrators up there walking onto the firing range today.
Indeed, you commented about those demonstrators earlier in the week. There's some, in fact, I think Christian peace activists who are out there. Should we be encouraging that sort of activity, or is that something that perhaps civic leaders, elected politicians should be exercising some caution as people are taking themselves what is really into harm's way as they're protesting?
No, look, my background is in the peace movement and is in anti-war campaigning, and you know, that's not a form of direct action that I'm taking in my role at the moment, but good on them. They know the risks, they've warned authorities in advance. This is at least the third time or the third talisman sabre exercises that I'm aware of where peace activists have walked into the area at the time. And yeah, I mean, it's an extremely provocative form of protest, but it is non-violent. And when you consider what it is that they're up against, they are protesting against massive violence. They don't want to see Australia involved in future wars, particularly not invasions of other countries overseas. And they're protesting non-violently. And Australia's got a strong and I would say quite proud history of that kind of activism.
Are you at all concerned, though, at reports that were out today that China's...
I've lost your audio, Kristina, so I don't know if your producers can help me out, but I can barely hear you.
Oh, dear. Well, we may need to leave it there with Senator Scott Ludlam. I'm a little disappointed. I would have liked to have gone back to him and discussed hair, because for a period of time there, he was the only politician rivaling me of having the most famous hair in the country. But we're just going to have to leave a follicle discussion for another time. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk to Senator Claire Moore.